so I'm gradually coming to terms with the fact that I know a that guy. To those who hear this and immediately think, well, just kick them out of my group or leave them altogether, please calm yourselves. I have no intention of doing either. The group I have is amazing, and I love how they engage with the stories I lay out for them. I also cannot kick him out because A, he's very close in my friend group, and booting him would alienate both him and them. And B, I live in New Zealand, which, for anyone who doesn't live there, most of you, contains maybe one player or an interested person for every 1,000 cubic miles. I do not exaggerate when I say that it took months of blood, toil, sweat, and tears to just find these 4 players. So the story. I assembled a miniature team of diverse young people in order to teach them how to play the game and induct them into the wonderful world of D&D. Kind of like Captain Planet and the Planeteers, if Captain Planet's only motivation was for people to actually respect him for once. I knew all these people would love the game, and I hoped that in them I could find a group that didn't have as many bad habits my other group of veterans had picked up. Everything seemed fine until a series of red flags started waving around one of the players, whom I will name Bodyguard from here on out. Bodyguard was an interesting person. He was the kind of person you could spend hours chatting online, but one you should never ever get trapped in a conversation with in real life. If you did, you would spend 80% of that conversation listening to his rambling stream of consciousness. Bodyguard had apparently traded in his filters for the ability to somehow talk while inhaling, meaning there was almost no end to his relentless torrents of information. I didn't hold it against him though, because he was a cool guy, despite that, and his social inadequacies just made him fit in with us even more. The problems only began when he joined the group. Red flag number 1, scheduling complaints. Both he and his mom brought to me on multiple occasions the suggestion that I change the times of the sessions to something that would be better for the whole group. Now, I will be the first to admit meeting on Saturday evenings from 4 to 9 wasn't the most comfortable time slot, but I explained to him multiple times that it was literally the only 5 hours I had spare all week, and I was cutting into other commitments pretty heavily even with that. He continued suggesting different times and dates, and I continued shooting him down until eventually he gave in and said that he would still attend sessions, but he would just have to leave an hour early. Side note, besides his claims that he was only thinking about the group at large, I know for a fact that he didn't ask anyone else what they thought of the awkward session times. Even when I approached them all in private, not one of them had any complaints. They even worked together to create a carpool schedule to make things easier, which took a load off my mind, which I was eternally grateful for. Red flag number 2, the character. So we met for session 0 to create characters and discuss expectations. Remember, all of these were new players, so I had to help them with pretty much everything. The first sub-red flag came when Bodyguard decided to play as a Warforged, and another player, whom I'll call Air, created a changeling. Seeing this, I suggested, keyword suggested, that if they both came from the same place, Eberron, that they may want to make their backstories interconnected. But they didn't have to if they didn't want to. I stressed that Eberron was a big place, and there was no real need to do this. But Bodyguard was off. He had a quick whispered conversation with Air, and then gave me the backstory that they had worked out. Air was the heir, you might have seen what I did there, to the throne of Eberron, but was forced to flee the continent after a failed coup left her adopted family dead. Bodyguard was a discarded war machine that his family put back together and assigned as his protector. I had quite a few problems with this, namely the whole bodyguard deal. I don't like character concepts like that in general because it means the character has no goals, motivations, or reason to exist beyond the other player character. It would also mean that it would be impossible for Air to have any meaningful character moments since he would have to share the spotlight with a piece of wood that only existed to make the I am oblivious to your human emotions joke about 10 times, which is how much it takes to stop from it being funny. But I let it slide because I was really excited for the heir's story since it would lead perfectly into a late game sequence I had planned in the back of my mind for ages. However, Bodyguard was an uncomfortable sticking point whenever I thought of it, and for more reasons than just his backstory. I know he wasn't cheating since he was using my dice, but he rolled 118 and 2 17s for his stats. Nothing below 11 for the rest. I offered the rest of the group a chance to reroll since none of them came even close to that kind of power, but none of them wanted to. After a bit of min-maxing for his level 1 character, he ended up having 20 AC without plate armor and was dealing between 15 to 20 damage a turn. But with a sinking feeling in my heart, I let the first session start. Red flag number 3. I reject your ruling and substitute my own. Since everyone was so new and we were playing Tyranny of Dragons for the first campaign, which has a first chapter that's notoriously about as noob-friendly as a Dark Souls hack made by the kinds of people that unironically own swords, I decided to run them through a quick one-shot of my own design during Session 0 to teach them the basics of skill checks, combat, and roleplay. It went about as good as could be expected, although the group nearly TPK'd due to me eyeballing the CR on the boss encounter, and accidentally putting them against a challenge way above their pay grade, but some fudge rolls sorted it out. However, one moment stands out to me. At one point, the group is walking along a forest path when they hear the sounds of combat off to the side. The ranger and the rogue both tear out through the bushes after it immediately without stopping to tell the rest of the group where they were going. After a few minutes of walking, they come across a battle between orcs and elves. Now at this point, Bodyguard tells me he's going to go after them. Since he's a massive tank of a man, and he's following 2 very stealthy individuals along an unbeaten path by a road that they didn't tell him about, I had him roll a wisdom check with a DC of 15 to follow him. He failed, so he had to spend 6 rounds wandering about before he found his way to the battle. In this time, the other 2 stealthily dispatched the orcs, saved the elves, and looted the battlefield. Bodyguard didn't show any outward signs of being in any way put out by this ruling, and he got his chance to shine in some later fights. However, a few days after the session, he approaches me and over time, our conversation turns to a recap of the session. He tells me he enjoyed it, but, and this is a genuine, bona fide quote, "I wasn't very happy missing that orc fight. I don't expect you to be making a ruling like that again." I was completely floored, not by what he just said, but how he said it. He was smiling and laughing throughout it, like it was just an observation, and not the single biggest slap in the face I've received in my life as a DM. I should have seriously chewed him out for it, but I was too shocked to think straight, and didn't want to make a scene. So I just made some non-committal noises and got out of there as fast as possible. Now I was confronted with a serious problem. He was an overpowered character with a backstory that seriously hurt the potential of another player, and a player who seriously needed to get his head deflated. If I didn't act fast, it could end in disaster. So, fellow adventurers of this subreddit, I did something that I'm not too proud of. You can hate me for this, but I did what was necessary. I killed this character. Now, to be fair, it wasn't entirely my fault. The beginning of the module is a meat grinder with the best of them, and he was the party tank, so he was constantly putting himself in danger. But I didn't target him unfairly or anything like that, and to his credit, he almost survived. But in the last half hour before he had to leave, he carked it in one of the most controversial encounters in the module. Spoilers for both the Horde of the Dragon Queen and Tyranny of Dragons. I will give you some time to skip out, and I'll probably put a time so that you can dodge these spoilers. It was the moment when Lithion, an adult blue dragon, attacks the keep the level 2 party was staying in. Yes, you read that right. The idea was that if the party dealt more than 24 damage or 1 crit to him, then he would leave, and until then, he would primarily attack the NPC archers over the party. However, I decided ahead of time that if Bodyguard did anything to draw attention to his character, that was it for him. Unfair? Possibly, but he needed to be reminded that the game didn't revolve around his whims, and his character was detrimental to the party as a whole, constantly picking fights and jumping in to steal the spotlight anytime I tossed anything Air's way. So while the rest of the party took pot shots at the beast using their ranged weapons, Bodyguard decided to climb up on one of the abandoned towers and try to jump on the dragon's back. And so, knowing that the dragon never comes closer than 20 feet to the keep in the official module, on Lynthian's next turn, he swooped down on that tower and barbecued the character alive. Even with a successful dex save, which he failed, I didn't need to roll damage. Bodyguard was toast. That was the last session before quarantine began, and I cancelled all sessions, but so far, I'm not too optimistic about whatever changes to him I thought I'd make. We had a long online correspondence after that about his new character, both public and private. The first thing he did was threaten to quit if I didn't let him start at level 3, which I was already planning on letting him do. The second thing he did was ask if he could play as another character from Air's backstory. I said no, stating that I had something planned for them in the future. I didn't, but Air was not happy with tying his backstory to Bodyguard a second time. Then he asked me if he could play as another NPC the party had met and fallen in love with during the first session. Kinda like that cliche kobold joke, but the NPC was a strapping human commoner with 8 hit points and a family. I said no again, because the party really liked this guy. So finally, he decided to create his own character. Then he wanted to be a shifter. Problem is, he didn't use the right rules for the race, by which I mean the ones listed in Rising from the Last War. I don't know what rules he used, whether playtest or homebrew, but they had a ton of abilities that weren't in the finished version, as well as innate spellcasting. When I found out and sent him the actual rules, he bemoaned the fact that they weren't as cool as the ones he wanted. When I refused to budge, he conceded, but declared that he was flavoring all his paladin spells and abilities, for 'twas his class, as innate biological abilities. I said he could certainly do that for some of them, but certainly not all of them. You can't explain away smite or lay on hands as being genetic deformities. And to this, he said, "Don't worry, I'm sure I can do it." Another example of him ignoring my ruling and instead just doing whatever he wanted. So far, nothing else has come of this, but frankly, I'm not going to let this go that far. If his new character is just as disruptive as his last one, I fully intend to sort him out, and I will be having a serious talk with him if he tries to tell me about what he expects me to do. Frankly, this is new territory for me. I've dealt with problem players before, but always in hindsight, and this is an ongoing story that I expect I will have to grapple with in the future. I really appreciate the fact that OP is trying to curb that guy behavior, but I feel that he's going about it in the wrong way. DM needs to make it known that it's the DM's way or the highway, and not be afraid to lose a player if they can't work well with others. Be honest about what's going on and not beat around the bush. Instead of saying I have that character saved for something else, explain that each player character needs to have their own motivations and whatnot. Also, he should really use point buy next time. What do you all think about this situation?